Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today I will show you how to build this Clone Pilot Phase 1 helmet out of EVA foam. Let's get started.
Yes, sir.
First, we will print the templates. For that, use the poster format in your printer settings. Because the parts are printed on multiple pages, you will have to cut away the edges. Use a ruler to do that as precise as possible. I recommend a ruler out of steel or aluminium for more stability. Just overlap the matching pages and fix them with Scotch tape. After doing that with all the pages, simply cut out each piece with a scissor. Before tracing the templates on the foam, we will heat it with a heat gun to make sure it's flat. Just don't overdo it with the heat so the foam won't be damaged. To make sure the templates will not slip while tracing it on the foam, you can use some of these needles. For tracing, I use a simple felt tip pen which can be clearly seen on the black foam. To glue the pieces together, I use contact cement. If you use the same brand as me, get the one that says Classic. It will also be easier if you pour it in a small bottle. Put the contact cement on the areas which are glued together, spread it with a scrap piece of foam, wait a few minutes so the glue can dry a bit and connect the pieces. Use the marking lines and letters to determine which parts belong together. Contact cement can be really strong after gluing, so don't mess up too much. As you can see, I was using different templates for the dome as the one you find in the PDF file. That's because I was not happy with the result and optimized the templates afterwards. Sometimes I will use some paper tape to make sure the parts don't separate again. This was the dome after the first attempt, and I thought there were just too many small pieces. The new template only consists of these two parts. Again, we will trace the template to the foam and cut it out. I will pre-bend the foam a bit so that we will have it easier to form the dome after gluing. You can easily bend the foam for places that are too narrow for putting glue on. This single piece makes it much easier to form a good round shaped dome, and of course it will be less effort to mend the dome later. This piece will come right between the small long parts of the bigger dome piece. will be glued so that it's further down and not even with the first piece. Fix the pieces with paper tape to make sure the seams will not open. After making the left side of the dome, it's time to join both pieces. Just glue the parts and work your way through it. Just remember to take your time and work as clean as possible. As always, it helps to work along the registration marks. Just don't stretch the foam, because after that the dome would look a bit bumpy. I'm much happier with this version of the dome. Compared to the first one, it's just much cleaner and easier to work with. As you can see, if I stretch and bend the first dome a bit too much, it's more likely to open the seams. I overdo a bit, but I hope you know what I mean. We don't need this anymore, so bye bye dome. Now we will work on the transition to the earpiece. For a clean round-shaped look, we will use a rotary tool with a sanding bit. I recommend to first cut away the inner circle and clean it up with a rotary tool. After that, glue the piece even with the dome. As you can see, we will get an abrupt straight drop. Now it's time for the face part. You can either mirror the template on the right side where the visor goes to cut out just one big piece, or, like me, two separate pieces. Remember to trace the visor on the foam so it will be easier to determine later where it has to be. We will cut it out at the end when the building is finished. Pre-bend the foam to make it easier to glue and connect with the dome. The face piece will be connected even with the ear transition piece and the dome. To prevent the left and right side to connect in the middle while joining it on the dome, just use a piece of paper. Remove the paper to connect in the middle. Cut out this cheek piece and join it on the face piece using the registration marks. After that, glue the second cheek piece right under the first one. For the earpiece, take an 8mm foam piece and glue a 5mm piece right on top. Remember to cut out the inner part before gluing. That's what we will get, and you can round up the circle piece with your rotary tool. Make sure to not forget that the bottom will be an inward cut through the whole thickness of the foam. Now we will simply glue on the earpiece. This time it's not even with the cheek piece. This might be a bit tricky and leave a small gap between face, cheek and earpiece, but this can be fixed later. The earpiece should be nearly even and in one line with the transition piece. After gluing the left side, the helmet starts to look pretty good. This piece comes right under the cheek and will also be connected with the face and the earpiece. These pieces will be the backside of the helmet. Just as always, orientate on the registration marks and letters. Pre-bending can help so that you don't have to do it after the gluing of both sides and risking to open the seams. I think it looks pretty good. Just bend the foam again before connecting the left and the right side. After connecting both sides, fix it with paper tape. These two small pieces will come right under the back side of the dome. Now it's time to connect the backside with the rest of the helmet. At the top, use the marked areas of the previous two pieces to glue on the top of the backside. This part is also pretty tricky. Just work as clean as possible and don't worry, every smaller gap can be fixed later. Paper tape could also be helpful, I just can't say it often enough. After successfully joining the back, I had small gaps on both sides, but like I said, we can fix that. Now to the chin and the mouthpiece. The chin needs a pretty pronounced bend in the middle to make it nearly curvy. The mouth will be a 2mm foam piece with the circles cut out, glued on a 5mm foam piece. When gluing it under the face piece, be careful and glue it even with the inside of the face piece. It may be necessary that you stretch the foam just a little bit. Now it's starting to look more and more like a clone trooper helmet. The chin piece will be glued right under the mouthpiece, again even with the inside. And now it's clearly starting to look good. The next part will be the long strip piece and comes under the chin, side and back piece. As always, use the registration marks and work your way as clean as possible. After connecting the left side, join the two pieces in the middle. Here comes the small respirator piece. For that, cut this piece out of 5mm foam and make cuts on the back side, just halfway through the foam thickness. With that, we can bend the foam and glue the sides together. The result will be this little cube-shaped piece. Simply glue it here and close the whole surrounding pieces. For the cover of the dome, cut this big piece out of 5mm foam. Make sure that it ends where the face piece begins. On the template there is an indicated area for a 2mm foam strip. Don't trace this on the 5mm foam, just leave it blank. I made this part a little bit longer so that I can cut it even with the face piece. That looks pretty good. Now we just have to fill this gap here with a strip of 2mm that goes over the whole dome. And now the helmet is nearly complete. We just have to add small details. This respirator is made of 3 circles of 5mm foam. The middle circle is as big as a 2 euro cent and both left and right have the diameter of a 1 euro cent. Then I cut it in 1/3 and glued it on. This time I use super glue. The only thing missing are 2 circles of 5mm foam that fit right in here, both for the right and the left side. now we can cut out the piece where the visor goes. You can clean out the edges here with your rotary tool. And now the building of the helmet is finished, and we will work on fixing some areas like gaps or small defects in the foam. For that I will use Liquitex modeling paste, which is really good for filling those areas. Just take a bit on your finger and squeeze it in the gaps and defects. We will also go over every seam and every connected area. Let it dry for a few hours before start the sanding. As you can see, I also filled the gaps on the backside. We will take sandpaper and sand the now hard modeling paste down so the surface will be smooth and even. I made myself a sanding stick with 100 grit and 400 grit sandpaper for better handling. You could also try and use your rotary tool to spare some time, but be careful not to damage the foam underneath. For smaller areas I just rip off a smaller piece of sandpaper and do it by hands. Sand down every area you covered with the modeling paste. As you can see, I circled the areas that I damaged with my rotary tool or just need some extra filling with the Liquitex. I just paste another layer of modeling paste and sand it down as before until I'm satisfied with the result. While drying, the modeling paste will shrink a bit, so we should do this procedure 2 or 3 times to fill every gap. After filling the seams and holes, we will use our heat gun to heat seal the foam for the next step. I will use Plastidip to cover and seal the surface with liquid gum. After 2 good layers of Plastidip, we can now see where we still have to make some improvements. Sure, you could just spray Plastidip in there, but that will possibly lead to drips that are a bit harder to remove. So again, we will just use Liquitex as before. After that, the surface now will be in a much more acceptable condition as before. I already wanted to do the priming. But I decided to give the helmet a nice coat of Mod Podge. Just mix some of that with a few drips of water and coat the helmet with a smooth paintbrush. One layer of that will be enough to give the helmet the final sealing. After letting the Mod Podge dry, I primed the helmet in 2 coats of light grey. You could use a different color for sure, but because I wanted the helmet to be mostly white, I chose a light color for priming. The decision what primer and lacquer you use is up to you. To prevent reactions of the two, like cracks and bubbles, you should use both from the same brand. Next I sprayed the helmet in 3 thick coats of white lacquer. Before spraying the dome cover in yellow, we will use paper tape to save the surrounding area from the lacquer. Take your time and carefully tape off everything surrounding it. Make sure that it's tight so no yellow lacquer will went under the paper tape. I will also use paper sheets to cover the bigger areas to not have to tape everything. Now that everything is covered, it's ready to be sprayed. 2 coats of yellow should be enough. And I think that looks really good so far. Now we will paint these lower parts of the dome in a dark grey. And also I will tape everything and some detailed areas around the earpiece. The ear detail could be dark grey, but I will paint them black later. And of course, I will also paint the mouse. This time I will not use lacquer, but instead simple acrylic paint. Just mix some black and white until you get the shade you want. In order to not see brush strokes afterwards, I use the brush with fine hair. Simply go over every area you want to paint and cover the white lacquer. After removing the paper tape, I was amazed by how good the helmet looks. It's not bad that some areas were not perfect, especially those covered in dark grey, because after the weathering it will not be noticed anymore. The next part is a bit tricky because we will have to paint the emblem of the Galactic Republic on the helmet. For that I used 2 different techniques. First, I tried to trace the emblem on paper tape, put the tape on the helmet and paint the emblem with a red acrylic pen. But it just not worked the way I hoped. For the other side, I just used the emblem template, fix it with paper tape and then trace it with a pen. You could either use an acrylic pen or a red edding. The one with the template worked much better, but it's up to you. Let me just say, cutting the emblem out of the paper tape is not easy. Nevertheless, I somehow managed to make it look good. Now we will paint the respirator and the ear detail with black acrylic paint. After removing the paper tape that covered the previous painted detail in grey, I pulled off a bit of the acrylic paint. But that's no problem, since I want the helmet in used look. Now the helmet is nearly finished and you could leave it as it be. But I want the helmet to look used and will use brown oil paint to give the helmet some small rusty details. Just use a simple brush and paint some areas as shown. The rust should be in some small corner parts and it don't has to be much. I will also use some sanding paper to remove small chips of the paint. That will give it a more used look. The acrylic paint is easy to remove and the helmet will look much more realistic. Just work your way over the whole helmet and don't forget the emblem. The final painting step will be the weathering. I use a mix of black and brown acrylic paint and water it down. Just mix it so it will look like a puddle of mud. Now use a big brush and paint your helmet with the mixture. Don't let it dry, just wipe it off with a paper towel. Do that over the whole helmet and it will look like it's right from the battlefield. After weathering the helmet, don't forget to save your work with a nice thick coat of clear lacquer. I must say, I'm really happy with the result. The last thing we have to do is cut out the visor. You can either use welding shield or, like me, use 0.5 mm transparent polycarbonate and cover it with tint film. Just remember to leave enough space to put the glue on. Check if your visor is big enough to cover the hole. Then use contact cement and glue it from the inside. Congratulations, Captain! Your helmet is now finished.